Thank you, Maggie. Before we start with the questions, I would like to personally thank Maggie and Mike and Kevin for giving very personal information. You could say that. I know it's very tough, but I think they deserve a great hand. Thank you very much. And now we'll take some questions. Just a little reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, press your mic, and it'll turn, I believe, green to do that. And also, I have a little bit less tolerance than the last moderator. So if you could keep your comment and question down to maybe a minute, and that will give more people an opportunity to speak, because we are fairly limited to our time. And we all appreciate that. And so, you might have a question. We'll take that gentleman back there first, and then.
Mike, does this work? Is this working?
If you gotta hold it real close.
I'm holding it back.
There you go.
Hey, I've worked with Veterans for Peace, and you know the Pentagon. The PTSD emerged out of the Vietnam War as a concept, not that it didn't exist before. And the Pentagon's current answer to PTSD from the Vietnam War is a 50th commemoration of the war, honoring the valor of our soldiers. And we in VFP are organizing a counter commemoration. I've got flyers here to pass out. And in particular, we're asking anyone who had an experience around Vietnam, veterans or not, to write a letter, and this flyer I have will tell you where to send it, email or snail mail it to, because we're going to gather here on Memorial Day to honor all the victims of the Vietnam War, and we invite people from all the wars and all the veterans to that. And I also want to echo my thanks for your trust and openness with us. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. So I'm going to pass these flyers around.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure a lot of us will participate in that.
Just a brief comment to Maggie. I did note a little bit of self-disparagement because you said several times your opposition to the war had come from what happened to you personally. And I wouldn't take anything away from that, because isn't that the experience of now almost 2 million people that were put into that situation? And don't we need to be able to speak to what their experience has been put inside of an illegitimate war? I just think your voice is so important. And just thank you. And very, very quickly to Michael, you made the point that we need to create our own narrative. And that makes me a little nervous, honestly. The idea of creating a narrative as if it's a story, you know, that isn't based on what's really happening. And we'll talk about it at the last teach-in tonight, but what I think we have to do is really get people to confront what has the U.S. actually done to those countries. Therefore, why does Islamic fundamentalism have a certain amount of attraction?
Yeah. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything to people, because if they're looking at the people in those countries in a racist way that don't deserve to be treated in a particular way because they're less than, if they believe in American exceptionalism, you know, that's what I mean about one of the reasons that religion is so powerful is because there's a narrative. One of the reasons that the Tea Party is able to do the things it does is because it plugs into the racist, sexist, homophobic narrative that this country very much has undercurrents in. So I guess what I'm saying is that somehow, and we're trying, I think, we have to develop as peacemakers and justice seekers, an overarching narrative that intersects our struggles so that people can see the commonality. But there has to be, I mean, maybe you don't think in stories, but you know, most people think in some kind of this is how I see the world, this is the lens, and if it doesn't fit in there, then it's bullshit, you know? And so I'm saying that, and I think all of us do that, because we have commonalities, we see the world in a particular way, and if it doesn't fit in, we're like, that's not, you know? So I think we have to develop one that speaks to people. We can't see people as defective. We're not doing something that's speaking to them to build a movement that's going to overcome all this other stuff, you know. So that's my perspective. I'm just trying to take responsibility for us building a movement by saying, well, what can I do? And I believe people think in narrative form. So I'm sure it's up for argument, but you know, it seems to be, you know, just historically, and I just want to say the things that seem to last throughout history are narratives. So.
Thank you, Michael. And I believe you had a hand back there.
Yeah, I think on the question of PTSD and suicides, I think that people need to talk a little bit, maybe some of the panel can do this, but the U.S. responsibility in creating the conditions that actually not only deteriorate people's mental health and drive them to suicide. In particular, the United States, after Vietnam, learned that one of the lessons was unit cohesion. And they used unit cohesion, male bonding in particular, as a vicious form. I mean, they're not only sending the units over, people over in units, but actually building in this culture of this fighting soldiers, etc. Then when they get to Iraq, not only do they go through the horror of basic training, which most people, if you don't go through basic training and you don't really understand what a brainwash that is and how it fucks over your mind, and if you're any kind of humanity with empathy, you're pretty much driven out of basic training unless you can suppress it and turn into a mindless, at least mental killer at that point. Then you get to Iraq, and you don't want to do what you see around you. So what do? They give you drugs. There's a list of 15 to 20 drugs that they dispense freely in Iraq and put the troops on the drugs. You turn to the chaplain for help. The chaplain turns you into your commanding officer. They use psychiatrists. Lesson from Vietnam. They use frontline psychiatrists to debrief the troops coming back and to then make them go out and do it again the next day. This was on 60 Minutes. So after a certain point of time, if you've got any kind of empathy in your unit, you either keep your mouth shut, like the guy who revealed the helicopter killings, you know, the soldier, I forgot his name right now.
Chelsea Manning.
That's right. Or you're threatened with being killed by your fellow gung-ho, you know, whacked out troops next to you. And you come home, and then you start to try to recover your humanity, and you've got these horrors of what you did. The busting in and killing people, beating people up in their homes, all the horror of that, the torture. So you end up killing yourself.
I'm sorry,
My
what's your
point is,
question?
I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to wrap it up, but I'd like people to comment on who killed all these. The suicide. My point is, the suicides are not because people are weak. The suicides are because they've been driven to do that by the madness of the system that we've got. That's all. Thank you.
Amen, brother.
First of all, we agree with you. I think basic training actually preconditions for a possible suicide, because you're taught that if you seek help, you're weak. If you're weak, you don't belong. And so immediately what's going to happen is that you aren't going to say that you're weak. Jeff went through that. Now the other, you mentioned about unit cohesion. But over, I think it was the third year of the war, it was pointed out that 55% of the suicides were reservists and National Guard. There is no cohesion. When they come back, they go for 1 week or 2 weeks over to Camp Pendleton, and then they go home. So they're operating all by themselves. Now, what happened to our son? He was doing the post-deployment health form, and he was checking off about firing his gun, seen dead bodies, what have you. And an officer, and I think it was well-intentioned, told him, if you keep filling that form out like that, you aren't going to be going home for months. So immediately, Jeff started answering. We have a copy of it. Jeff started changing the answers and said that he didn't need help. So there's a lot of factors that go on in this. And Jeff, to be honest with you, he usually would have said that he needed help. But see, the system's got to change. Why does a person have to be held in Camp Pendleton, California, for treatment? Why couldn't they go back with their unit and then be placed in care within where their unit comes from? So there's a lot of things that I totally agree with you. And believe me, our son was not weak. The thing that really bothers me is when I see PTSD and I see combat-related mental health, when they start putting that as an illness. I mean, isn't PTSD a normal reaction to abnormal situations? Well then, somebody's got to straighten out the military and the VA.
I guess, yeah, this idea of being weak. So one question is, what is weakness in this type of situation? You know, and another thing is that I really think the central issue globally is male supremacy. And part of male supremacy, the paradigm is all those things that we're tough and we don't cry and, you know, all that. So if you start to, one of the reasons that's not going to leave the military is because if you start to unravel that, then you're unraveling male supremacy. So I don't think it's going to go away. It's not going away in society. You just look at the TV, just look at everything when it comes to how men are supposed to act. You know, what are we teaching our sons, you know, and what are we teaching our daughters? Either be docile or be like these men, you know? So I'm just wanting to get that out there about this idea of weakness and where that all comes from and what role it plays in the military. But obviously, you're totally correct.
The only thing I'll add real quickly is that it's not by accident that people aren't getting the care and services that they need. It's, you know, when you hear from whistleblowers from within the VA or from within the military medical system, they have a lot of pressure on them to get these people back out to duty. And so, you know, medicate them and send them back. And same with when people come home and they fill out those medical screenings and they say, oh, if you need help, you're going to have to stay here. They know people don't want to stay there after a year of deployment. They know exactly what's going to happen. So it's not by accident at all.
You know, Maggie brought up something that I just remembered. When my son made his first deployment to Iraq, they were getting ready to leave, and about that time, you know, there was a lot of pressure on the military to identify if anyone had an issue with what they were seeing. And so what they did was, here's the airplane, you went to this table and they said, do you have any problems? Did you see anybody killed? Do you have nightmares? If they answered yes, you go there. If you answer no, you get on the plane and come home. Finally, at least the Marine Corps got smart. They don't ask that question until you actually get home now. So, you know, I know everybody. I was in the military. I would have said, no, I have no problems. I'm going home. You know, but I believe they had a hand up over here. Did I miss that? We'll go here, there, and there. Okay.
I just was going to make
You need to
oh, sorry.
speak into the mic so we can record it. Thank you.
Just a quick comment. I'm just going to say that I believe just generally that capitalism and nature and the environment and health are at complete opposite ends of the spectrum, and that I'm just going to use the term capitalism wants to just drive the environment and human beings into debt on all kinds of levels. And psychological debt is basically what post-traumatic stress and everything else that I'm hearing is, and that's all they care about. So.
Thank you. I forgot who I said, but I think it was right there.
Yes, I'm a Vietnam veteran. I spent 5 years flying combat missions as a Vietnamese voice intercept operator. Past few years I have been in group therapy. One of our topics of discussion quite often is suicide. It's not a question of weakness. It's a way to stop the pain.
Right.
Oops. I'm sorry.
That's okay, brother.
That's great, brother. No problem.
It's all right.
Thank you.
Right here. Maybe I missed.
Okay, I flew in this morning. First of all, I want to say to Kevin, in terms of PTSD, to everybody, leave out the T, right? It's moral injury, as our brother Jacob George always said. But I came in and I sat next to a woman. We introduced ourselves, and her father had been in Vietnam. And she was telling me about him. I told her I was in the Navy, etc. And she told me, I go to the Pease Air Force Base in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and when the troops are going to Iraq or wherever, I greet them. I send them on their way. And when they come back, I do the same thing with my father, who is 82. And I wanted to say to her, well, aren't you enabling the war? But I didn't know what to say. So I'm wondering what you might have said to this woman. How would you have responded to, I mean, I'm trying to keep my cool here, because I know that, like all these kids who write letters, to the soldiers, support the troops, all the care packages that different companies send over. It just enables the war to continue and continue.
I'll start off on that, is because our organization send out care packages every year, okay? And to our point is, we're not enabling the war, we're making it a little bit easier for the people that's doing their job. They don't control what they do, they're told what to do, and it's a job. I signed up for it, everybody signed up for it, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the best job I can. I may personally disagree with what I'm doing, but I will do my job. And there may be people in the service that feels differently than me, but that's the way I've always felt. And I always felt that the current crop of that's in the military feels basically the same way. But I'm doing my job. And I may agree or disagree. When I was in, I disagreed with some of the stuff I was doing or had to tell somebody to do. But I still did it because I felt it was my job to do that. And I was going to do it the best I could.
I think it's tricky, but I would encourage people to find the troops that aren't getting support, like whistleblowers and people who are speaking out, and gay service members and other folks like that, and push a little further to go past the flag waving and yellow ribbons and think about what are these people really dealing with and what do they really need in their lives. So I would just push a little bit.
I have.
And I'd just like to add, after Jeff died, we didn't know what to do. To be honest with you, we got severe sunburns just by staying on the deck and not acknowledging anything. And then, to be honest, it was MFSO that basically became a rescue and our lifeline. It was through the urging and the support of the other families that gave us a voice, that encouraged us and made it safer for us to be able to express all the feelings and all the rage that we had. Because we had so much rage, it was generalized, and we were killing ourselves with it. But then all of a sudden, they kept telling us, support the warrior, not the war. And I think if, just like Maggie was saying, it's not even for the troops that get lost in the system, it's for all the troops. You gotta be there, not just waving the flag when they come back, but you gotta be there and really be there for them. Because they have stories that they need to tell. Our son started talking about what happened in Iraq the last 2 weeks of his life, when he started falling apart. And he wasn't even talking to us. He was talking to the woods in the back of our house. We just happened to be sitting next to him.
So since I've had some time to think, actually, the soldiers do have the ability to stop everything if they refuse to fight. Now the question is, should you have that expectation or not have that expectation? Because one of the reasons the Vietnam War ended is because the army was broken and people really had started to refuse to fight, and they were like, oh hell, we need to go ahead and finish this up before everybody sees that this is what's happening, right? So at some level, let's be clear that people can do that, but for me, it's hard to expect someone who from a little baby up to 17 years old has been taught a particular thing, 18, 19, they go into the military. Now I'm gonna tell them they have the responsibility to figure out whether or not they should be, fighting. So that's why I don't really have that expectation per se, but I know they can, and some do, and I support that. And I support the person who thinks they're doing the right thing, and I'll talk to them about it. So now as far as this with the woman, what I tend to find is that if you ask people questions, then you'll find openness to have a discussion, right? So I might ask, why are you doing that? And then she'll answer, and do you agree with the war? And then she'll answer, and then you can start to talk about it. I think the worst thing is to try to tell people things. I think the best thing is always try to ask them questions and then engage in a conversation. So.
Yeah, thank you, and right, okay, yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity. 50 years ago, I took off the uniform after 2 years as a medic right up the road at Fort Meade and being military police for 3 days. And I was in the first protest, April 17th, 1965, before all the other protests started. And I had a decision, and I almost considered suicide at one point, although I'm not a combat veteran. I can either become a revolutionary or shut my mouth and get married. I chose the latter. And if I hadn't had 3 kids, small, I probably would have committed suicide because I felt very isolated. Nobody gave a damn when we were slaughtering thousands of people. And it just, I was very quiet for 15 years until the Iranian crisis. Part of what I should say, what I learned from an African at Michigan State probably saved my life. He was a Nigerian celebrating his first year of independence. That's how I figured out Vietnam in boot camp, by going to the library. And it was a war for independence, first from the French, and then it was going to be from us. The Iranian in that house taught me about, he hated the Shah and the overthrow of Mossadegh by the CIA. So I kept my mouth shut until my son was 13 years old in 1980. And then I became politically active, and I've been politically active ever since. I have a question for the young woman with the Iraq Veterans Against the War. 2 comments. That same year that you had the Iraq the hearings in 2008, March 10th through 12th, I believe, I was there, thanks to Camille Mejia, who I met when he got out of jail, and he's one of my heroes. On my website, I have a website called peacequests, with an S on the end.org. Check it out. Ann Wright's there, Medea Benjamin's there, and Camilo, and so forth, to make young people aware of peace activists. That's my role in life at this point, at age 77 next month. Anyway, my question about the Iraq Veterans Against War, at the hearings, correct me if I'm wrong, I walked the halls of Congress with letters I typed in to try to have some hearings for you folks. And I think the media and the Congress ignored those hearings. And the final thing I'll say, which is a little separate, I chewed out 2 congressmen up in the Canandaigua VA for what's taking you so long to take care of the veterans. That was 2008. Okay, I've said more than enough. Thanks for listening.
Well, just on your comment that the media ignored it, I think the hearings were covered pretty widely on international news, but they were noted as one of the top 10 undercover, unexposed stories of 2008. So it really was kind of blacked out by the U.S. media. But maybe your work on the Hill helped a little bit, because I know that after the big Winter Soldier hearing, there was Winter Soldier on the Hill, where fewer service members went and were able to testify, and then people took that and started doing it on a local level and talking at universities and churches and community groups across the country.
Yeah, there was 2 people who had their hands up back there, I think. Yeah, the individual in the brown, yeah, go ahead.
I hope we might talk a little bit more about healing moral injury and a narrative about how we do that at the societal level. Like, I think that there's a lot of kind of free-floating guilt that's being exploited with the narrative of where people who aren't in military families have a general sense of guilt about these wars and the fallout that's coming home, and it's being channeled, through the mythology of that this is the price of freedom, and that and that if you criticize it, you're spitting on the graves of those who sacrificed, and that we haven't sacrificed enough. But this whole thing of moral injury, I guess what does that mean? You've talked about some of the things of like Maggie did about redemptive actions of working with the Iraqi people and all of that. But it seems like, yeah, I think we have to reframe that as far as a public responsibility of that our country needs to heal this moral injury, or we're destroying ourselves.
I don't know what the solution is for our country to take it on, but the idea of a moral injury really resonates with me. I think it's something that I can understand, because I wasn't infantry, I was communications, but I think about my deployment, my participation, and how I was still supporting the effort that dehumanized and killed innocent people, and I do feel that moral injury. And thanks to the brother for mentioning Jacob George and bringing him into the space, because that's something that he used to talk about a lot, too. And for those who don't know, you should probably look into that. I was going to start to explain it, but I think we're close to out of time, so I'll pass it along.
I was going to say something.